Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy emotionally driven stories that stay with you long after the video ends. These stories aren't loud or rushed. They quietly settle into your heart. That night forced me to face something I had avoided for years. Before we go any further, I want to be clear. This story deals with heavy themes, emotional manipulation, blurred family boundaries, and difficult realizations. If those topics feel overwhelming, it's okay to step away. This is my story. It's raw, it's complicated, and even now it's not easy to tell. I was 26 when I moved back home. Not ideal. Not what I imagined for my mid-20s. I had been engaged. His name was Gavin Horton. We were just 2 months away from our wedding when everything fell apart. He told me he didn't trust me anymore. He felt like I was hiding something. I wasn't. But suspicion can grow louder than truth. He searched through my phone, questioned my friendships, and slowly the relationship cracked under the pressure. Eventually, he left, and like many people do when their world collapses, I ran back to the place that once felt safest, my childhood home. My parents welcomed me in. My mom, Bonnie Dean, owns a small vintage furniture store in town. She's quiet, observant, and keeps her emotions close. My dad, Dallas Hahn, is the opposite. Charismatic, loud, the kind of man who fills every room with stories and laughter. Growing up, everyone said I was Dad's favorite. He used to call me his little lifeline. Back then, it felt comforting, special. But moving back home as an adult, things felt different. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to directly, just small moments that made me pause. The way conversations lingered a little too long. The way compliments sometimes felt heavier than they should. The way I felt watched, even when nothing inappropriate was happening. I told myself I was overthinking. My life had just fallen apart. Of course, everything felt fragile. My mom seemed distant, not cold, just withdrawn. She often kept herself busy in her workshop or went to bed early, leaving the house quiet at night. And that's when the late-night talks started. Dad would knock softly on my door, cup of tea in hand, asking how I was coping. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes he just listened. He told me I was strong, that anyone would be lucky to have me. On the surface, it looked like support. But slowly, I started noticing something I couldn't ignore. How deeply my sense of worth depended on his approval. Every relationship I had ever been in, every decision I made, some part of me wondered what he would think. After Gavin left, I started journaling. Not for aesthetics, not for social media, just messy, desperate pages filled with questions. Why did I always feel responsible for other people's emotions? Why did jealousy feel familiar? Why did love sometimes feel like control? Eventually, I started therapy. My therapist once asked me something that stayed with me. What does your father's love feel like? Not look like, not sound like, feel like. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Safe, I said, but intense. She nodded gently and explained something I had never heard before. Emotional enmeshment. When boundaries in a family become unclear. When love and control quietly overlap. That was the first time I realized maybe the discomfort I felt wasn't random. Maybe it wasn't just heartbreak making me sensitive. Maybe I had been ignoring red flags for years. And that night, the night everything shifted, I finally stopped ignoring them. That night didn't begin dramatically. There was no shouting, no southern chows, just silence. The kind of silence that makes every small sound feel louder than it is. It was past midnight when I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I remember staring at the ceiling for a few seconds before answering. Another knock followed, gentle, familiar. "It's me," my dad's voice said quietly. I opened the door just enough to see him standing there holding 2 mugs of tea. He smiled the same warm smile I had known my entire life. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Thought maybe you couldn't either." There was nothing obviously wrong about it. That's what made it confusing. He came in, sat at the edge of my bed, and we talked at first about normal things, work, memories, how I was handling everything with Gavin. But then the conversation shifted. He started talking about how disappointed he was in Gavin, how no one had ever truly understood me the way he did, how some men were intimidated by strong women. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "You've always needed someone who sees you the way I do." It wasn't the sentence itself. It was the tone. There was a weight behind it. I laughed awkwardly and tried to change the subject, but he didn't move. He stayed sitting close, studying my face in a way that made me suddenly aware of the small space between us. That's when I felt it clearly, not fear exactly, but discomfort I couldn't name. I stood up, pretending to straighten something on my desk just to create distance. "You don't have to pull away from me," he said softly. The words weren't aggressive. They were almost hurt, but something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I saw the dynamic from the outside. I wasn't just his daughter. I was the person he leaned on emotionally, the one he confided in about his frustrations with my mom, the one he praised in ways that felt bigger than parental pride. He noticed, and suddenly all those childhood memories replayed differently. The possessiveness, the subtle comments, the way he discouraged certain relationships. It wasn't protection. It was dependency. He eventually left my room that night without incident. No raised voices. But after the door closed, I didn't feel relieved. I felt awake, like I had just stepped outside of a story I had been living in for years without questioning. The next morning, I couldn't look at him the same way. And my mom, she noticed. She watched us carefully at breakfast. Her silence felt heavier than usual, almost knowing. Later that week, I brought it up in therapy. Dr. Barrera listened quietly and then asked me something simple. "When you create distance, how does he respond?" The answer came instantly. He becomes sad, withdrawn, sometimes even offended. And that's when it hit me. Healthy love doesn't punish you for needing space. Healthy love doesn't make you feel guilty for growing. That night wasn't about something dramatic happening. It was about clarity. It was the night I realized I needed boundaries, real ones. And the hardest part, I didn't know how he would react once I finally set them. After that night, I started doing something I had never done before. I paid attention not to what my dad said, but to how I felt. Every time he entered a room, I noticed the shift in my body. Every time he complimented me, I noticed whether it felt supportive or heavy. Every time I chose to spend time alone, I noticed the guilt that followed. The guilt was the loudest. A few days later, he knocked on my door again. This time I didn't open it immediately. "I'm okay, Dad," I called out gently. "I'm heading to bed." There was a pause on the other side, longer than it should have been. "Oh," he replied finally. "All right." His voice sounded different, smaller, almost wounded, and right on cue that familiar guilt rushed in. I almost opened the door, almost apologized, almost comforted him for something that wasn't my responsibility, but I didn't. The next morning at breakfast, he was quieter than usual. No big stories, no love left, just short answers. My mom noticed. She always noticed. She looked at me once, a long unreadable look, then went back to stirring her coffee. Later that afternoon, my dad cornered me in the kitchen. "Did I do something?" he asked. The question sounded innocent, but it carried weight. I took a breath. "I just need a little more space lately," I said carefully. "I'm trying to figure some things out." His expression shifted. Confusion first, then something sharper. "Space from me?" he asked. "After everything I've done for you, there it was. Not anger, not yelling, just emotional pressure." I felt my throat tighten. "This isn't about gratitude," I said softly. "It's about boundaries," he laughed. "But it wasn't warm boundaries," he repeated. "Since when do daughters need boundaries from their fathers?" The sentence hung in the air between us. And for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. "Since they grow up," I replied. Silence filled the kitchen. He stared at me like he was seeing someone unfamiliar. Not his little lifeline. Not the girl who needed his approval, just me. That evening, he didn't knock on my door. And the house felt different. Less suffocating, but also heavier. Like something unspoken had cracked open. I told Dr. Barrera about the conversation. She nodded and said something that stayed with me. When someone resists your boundaries, it often means they benefited from you not having them. That sentence echoed in my mind all week. I began spending more time out of the house, meeting friends, applying for jobs, reclaiming pieces of myself that had quietly shrunk over the years. And slowly, I started to see something clearly. My heartbreak with Gavin wasn't random. I had been conditioned to confuse intensity with love, control with care, jealousy with protection. But here's what I didn't expect. My mom finally spoke. And what she said changed everything. That if you've ever felt the fine line between love and control, this story is for you.